Welcome to our presentation of 10 steps to a successful CRM implementation. I'm Chad Collette, the Director of Marketing here at Ledgeview Partners, and I'm happy to welcome Jody Gilroy and Melissa Green. Both Jody and Melissa are CRM application consultants with Ledgeview, and we're the speakers who delivered this very popular original presentation at our 2015 CRM conference in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at Miller Park. Jody, Melissa, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Chad. All right, so my name is Melissa Green. As Chad mentioned, I'm a CRM application consultant at Ledgeview. I've been here for about 2.5 years. I have been working with Dynamic CRM since the very first version, which was quite a few years ago. So the perspective that I'm going to bring to this presentation is from real-life project experience, and we'll be able to cite some examples of actual projects that I've worked on in the context of these 10 steps. And then one thing to point out is you will notice that we do have a baseball theme throughout our presentation. So as Chad mentioned, we did this original presentation at Miller Park, so that would explain kind of a lot of our baseball references throughout the presentation. So Jody?
Thanks, Melissa. So as Chad mentioned, I also am a CRM application consultant with Ledgeview. Prior to joining the Ledgeview team, I worked in the marketing field for 15 plus years, but as part of doing that too, I was also part of a CRM implementation team where we brought CRM into the business through evaluation of partners all the way through actual implementation. So today, I'm hoping to provide the perspective on the client side today as we're going through these 10 steps for successful implementation.
Okay, so just a couple of objectives to point out before we dive into the content here. And the first one is that we just hope that you leave this presentation with a good understanding of these 10 steps. And a few things to point out is that as we move through these 10 steps, keep in mind that in order to have a successful project, you don't have to absolutely master all of these to the degree in which we described, but all of them should have some sort of presence in your project. And then there's really no specific order of importance that we're presenting these in, instead just kind of a logical flow from the start of a project to the end where it made sense. Certain ones will be obvious that they do need to happen like at the beginning of the project or at the end, that kind of thing. And then for each different organization, these 10 steps will play a different role. Some will be more or less important, and some you will focus, more or less on. So each company and each implementation is a little bit different. But as I mentioned, if you can have at least a presence of each of these 10 steps, that will set you up for success. And then a lot of the examples that we're citing throughout this presentation do pertain to kind of the first-time core CRM implementation. But certainly these 10 steps could be applied to and used for phase 2, phase 3, additional functionality, upgrades, that kind of thing for, wherever you are in the evolution of your CRM journey. And then the second objective is just that you gain some actionable knowledge that you can apply right away. So you can pick out a few things from here that you can, as soon as the presentation is done, that you can act on. And then our last step, which is step 10, is user adoption. We're kind of going to end with that. And like I said, there's no order of importance. If there was, this would probably be the first one, because we do think that user adoption is the most important. As you will see throughout the presentation, all of the other 9 steps do certainly directly feed right into user adoption. So keep that in mind as you're working through your projects, that at the end of all of these steps, the users do need to adopt the system in order for it to be successful. Okay, so step 1 we are calling spring training, and this really relates to getting prepared. So we're calling this one define your vision. So before you go about implementing a CRM system, you really need to have a really good understanding of why you are implementing the system. This also kind of helps to define your vision. So a couple bullet points on the slide here are examples of, common reasons that a company would decide to implement a CRM system. Certainly, you're going to have more than a couple business drivers, as you'll see here. But at this point, you really want to stay away from focusing on the technology that's going to be used, and really focus on your business. Be sure that you have a clear understanding of why you're going to implement the CRM system and what you hope to gain from it, so your vision. How you get there, that's something that will kind of present itself and evolve as we move through the next steps. But you also need to set this vision up front, because as you progress through the project, it's very easy to get off task, to kind of lose your way a little bit and get off on tangents. But if you can have this vision clearly defined up front, you can easily get realigned and get back on track. But without the vision, you can kind of get lost.
Okay, so step number 2 is agent selection. Here is where you're going to be looking at selecting a partner for your project. This is a very critical step in a project. So don't underestimate the evaluation period to find a good fit, not only for your project, but a partner that fits your organizational culture as well, somebody that you're going to like working with. So what are the steps in selecting a partner? The first step is to really understand what your project needs are. Here you're going to want to ask yourself, do you need help with selecting the technology for your project? Or maybe you already know what technology you want to use, such as Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce, and you're already ready to jump into design and implementation. Or maybe training will be a critical need for your company. Scoping out beforehand what you want from a partner will help you with the next step, which is defining your partner selection criteria. So here's really where you want to decide what's important to you when it comes to selecting a partner. On the surface, this may seem obvious, and most people say, I want someone with CRM experience, and that's a good start. But what about asking yourself more about these companies, such as what is their focus? Does the partner focus solely on CRM implementations, or are they a full-fledged technology company? Which one best aligns with your needs? What kind of business expertise do they have in addition to technology expertise? Do they have expertise in the industry that you're in, such as maybe manufacturing or distribution? You also want to ask, what is the size of the firm? What will your availability be to the project team and developer resources? How does that align with your timeline and when you want to get things done? How many CRM projects have they completed? What are the project fees and timelines? I mean, those are typical evaluation points in any type of project. But specific to CRM, you'll also want to ask, how comfortable are they with, or what's their philosophy more of using out-of-the-box CRM functionality versus doing custom development work? And how does that align with your goals? And this one may not make your initial list, but it's an important one. Will this partner be a cultural fit for your organization? Will your team like working with this partner? As a project manager, will you like working with this implementation team? It was funny on the project that I worked on specifically, we aligned all of these kind of partner attributes and scored them. And in the end, it was really came down to everybody was very strong in technology, their understanding of CRM, even their project fees and timelines were very much aligned. So ultimately, when it came to making our decision on a partner, it came down to who were we most comfortable with. So don't underestimate that cultural fit in evaluating your partners. So once you have your selection criteria, you're going to want to go ahead and meet with the potential partners that you have narrowed your selection down to. Ask, as part of this evaluation process, ask for references, make phone calls too of other projects that they've worked on. Really treat this like a job interview. You will be spending a good amount of time with this partner, so you want to make the right call up front. And then finally is, after selecting a partner, really define and articulate your expectations to that partner. Set the stage for the project up front. Define to them what will make this project successful for you.
All right, step number 3 is the draft. So this is a step where you're going to kind of develop your internal project team. So as Jody mentioned, you may opt to partner with a consulting firm to help in this, but certainly that doesn't dismiss the need for you to have a very good, solid internal project team. So the purpose really of the team is that it's going to foster buy-in from the top down. And the next slide we'll get into what are the different roles of the team. But as you will see, there's different representation throughout the organization. So not only does it foster buy-in, but it does kind of make your project visible within the organization. It helps you to facilitate and have a better understanding of the requirements for the CRM system, because you do have adequate representation from all levels of the company. And it really ensures ownership of project success. So the people that are on the team, hopefully by nature, are going to want to have that project be successful. So the more that you can have ownership, the more you're fostering success for the project. And then another thing to point out is that the team will serve different purposes at various points in the project. So as you move throughout the project, requirements gathering to the, testing of the functionality, actually rolling it out, and then after you've gone live, the team is going to play a different purpose. So you want to kind of take that into account, and realize that as you're picking your team. And also the size of your team is going to vary. There's no kind of magical number as to how many people should be on a CRM project team. It really is contingent upon your company's culture, your organizational structure, and really the scope of your implementation. So on this next slide here, we're going to talk about kind of the roles of the team. And this should help you to figure out maybe just what that right number is for your organization. So you want to have some sort of steering committee. These are members that are typically more at the executive level that are kind of steering the ship, certainly are helping more upfront with setting the vision and articulating the business needs and business problems that are going to be solved, but they're not ones that are going to be involved day to day and real hands-on, but more so kind of involved from the periphery to keep things moving. And then the executive sponsor, that's typically the key stakeholder or sometimes key stakeholders. They are going to be definitely a little bit more involved. A lot of times this might be somebody from the customer service management team or the sales management team, or possibly marketing, depending on which one of the business drivers is the most important for this piece of the project. But this executive sponsor is really the one that's going to drive the project and ensure its success and keep all the other team members aligned. And then we have the team captain. And this truly is kind of the owner of the project from start to finish, really involved day to day and involved with all of the other team members. So sometimes this is referred to as a project champion or even an internal project manager. This was the role that Jody served on the project that she referenced in her introduction. So this is a person you need to very carefully select. And then you're going to have your team be made up of some subject matter experts. So if you're doing a data integration, you may need a subject matter expert that's going to be part of the team that is familiar with maybe the ERP system that you're integrating with, familiar with its data and how it's structured. If there's a certain business process that's very involved, you may need a subject matter expert that it's very knowledgeable about that process. And then you're going to want cross-functional and cross-departmental users of the system. So people that will be using the system that are going to represent the different areas of the company. So in a recent implementation that I worked on, the main focus of this first phase of the implementation was the sales department. So they had salespeople kind of scattered across the world, and they were broken down into regions, and then within the regions, broken down into areas. So we had one regional manager from the US, one regional manager from each of the regions abroad, and then we had a couple of the area sales managers representing a few of the regions. Now, since all of their processes across these areas and regions did align, we didn't need to have multiple people from all of those areas, but certainly we had a good representation of each kind of level of user and level of in their sales organization. And then certainly you're going to want to have IT representation. So the role that IT will play will vary, depending on the nature of your rollout. And they may be more involved during the actual implementation, maybe not so much during requirements gathering, but certainly they do need to have a presence. So a few key questions to ask when you're deciding who you should have on your project team. Over on the right-hand side of the slide here, does this person have good overall knowledge of the company and or specific areas of the company? You know, are they aligned with the vision? Do they know what the vision and the strategy of the company is? And do they have industry knowledge? Do they have an open mind to change and to process improvement? Do they have ample time to dedicate to the project? This is often one that people kind of giggle at because nobody really has time. But certainly in order to make the project successful, you know, the team members need to be allowed to free up a bit, you know, for those key areas, key times in the project to have the ample amount of time to dedicate to the project. Certainly this is an area, and we'll talk about this a little bit more on the next slide with common mistakes, but an area that sometimes causes problems. And then lastly, does this user have good rapport with the other users? So the next slide here, I'll talk about some common mistakes in your project team. So the first one is that the team is too small. Naturally, if the team is very small and not made up of users that represent all the areas of the business, you likely won't gather the most appropriate or the most in detail requirements for the project and for what the system needs to do. And this oftentimes can feed to low user adoption. When the project team is very small, there's not a lot of visibility. A lot of people don't necessarily know that the project is going on, and then oftentimes that leads to low user adoption. And then the opposite of that, the team is too large. When you have too many people on the team, you know, there's really no ownership. You know, that one person thinks the other person's going to be doing, you know, doing this and so forth, and nobody really truly owns the project and the success of the project. And then also with any other type of committee or meetings, nothing truly gets done, or it gets done at a very slow pace. So certainly you don't want your project to be too large. And then another very common mistake that we see is that it's too heavily focused in IT. Certainly IT, as I mentioned, does need to have a presence in the project, but when we're talking about you know, making business processes better for the users and solving, you know, business problems that way, certainly that has to be led by the business side and not by IT. And oftentimes when IT does run the projects, that does lead to lower user adoption. And then another common mistake is that the executive sponsor is micromanaging. So the executive sponsor, almost having too much control, this makes other team members or users, when we're trying to gather requirements, it makes them resistant to really offer ideas and to step up and kind of take the lead. And oftentimes a lot of the best ideas do come, you know, from the users and from the, you know, the project team as a whole. So you certainly want to have an executive sponsor that's leading, but not that's controlling and micromanaging the project. And then the last one, team members have no time. This often leads to projects that are rushed. So certain information needs to be gathered or analyzed. You know, little sub-meetings need to be conducted. And when people are too busy, that often gets rushed and certainly is something that is incomplete. So you come down to crunch time and keeping the project moving along, and it's incomplete. So certainly you want to make sure that the people on the team, you know, are allowed to have ample time to dedicate to the project.
All right, so now you have your team in place. The next piece is setting your game plan. So I'm going to stop on this slide for a second because one of the key points we're going to talk about is what are the components of a successful game plan. So as you can see here in this photo, this team is in an major extra inning scenario. We're looking at the 17th inning. And as you can see, the fans have disengaged and only one lonely fan is left. So what you don't want to happen is have this happen to you in your implementation of CRM. You don't want to be that project manager sitting there all by yourself. So how do you avoid that? And really that's by setting a good game plan up front. And part of that is defining your project scope. So here is where you're going to really understand at a high level at least what is involved in your project. What areas of the business are you going to impact? Is it sales, service, marketing? And here also is after you've kind of defined that scope, you're going to hold a project kickoff meeting within your organization. These will, the number of meetings that you'll need will depend on the size of your project to set that good game plan. But during this meeting, you're going to want to clearly state the objectives of the project. This is really the who, what, why, when, and where of your CRM implementation. You're really going to start building the excitement for your project here and clearly state the expectations for the team that has been selected. You'll want to be very clear here that internal resources will be needed for the project, and this both includes people and their time, as Melissa mentioned in one of her previous slides. So hold that strong kickoff meeting. The next thing is, as you're going through your implementation, you're going to want to keep your projects in scope. So going with our baseball theme here, it's that concept of a base hit versus a home run. So when you're defining your project scope, it will be very tempting to go for home run projects. But it's important to see the value in the base hit or smaller projects because they will ultimately lead you to a game win. So identify quick wins. While they may not be as exciting, cumulatively they are impactful. Also, those home runs are okay as well once in a while, but they tend to potentially push your project out of scope and out of budget. So set your project milestones and prioritize your initiatives as you're defining your project requirements. And that leads into the next step. You want to avoid extra innings. Remember that picture that we looked at just a slide ago? Set a project timeline and stick to it. Be dedicated to getting the project done on time, on budget, and within scope. If the project extends too long, it will certainly jeopardize user adoption. It's better to actually launch phase projects than to extend one phase too long and disengage your project team. And then the final point is to start establishing communication. It's important throughout your project to have an effective communication plan, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming slide, but it will be a key factor to success in your project. So to keep your game plan in check, work with your partner by communicating needs and responding to the requests as quickly as possible, and also communicating internally to your team.
Okay, step 5, what does it take to win? And this is really where you get down into the details of specifying your requirements. So this really takes that very first step, defining your vision and understanding the why, and really breaks that down into greater detail. So something to help here, certainly for those of you that have not embarked upon a CRM implementation yet, this is something that you can do right away. But really make a list of your current processes. Now this doesn't mean at this point to go ahead and flow chart and Visio diagram all of them out, but certainly just have a list, have an awareness of what are all the processes that happen here. So our salespeople convert leads to opportunities. Salespeople prepare quotes. Salespeople convert quotes into orders. Those are some common ones, but there's certainly hundreds of different examples of all of the different processes that your employees perform on a day-to-day basis. So have a list of those current processes just to start, and then from there, that'll help you sort of identify where the problems are and help you identify which are the processes that we really need to focus on. Certainly for this first phase, and then prioritizing for later phases. The questions to ask yourself are: which processes are taking too much time? Which do users complain about or simply just they don't do? Which really don't add value or are perceived to not add value? Which seem inefficient or are way too manual, take too much time? Which are too complex? Which processes just don't make sense? And which ones are the most important and crucial? So certainly some things to stimulate thought around that. So in the next slide, let's say once you have your processes down and have identified the ones that you're really going to focus on and try to build into the system, kind of make better, have the system help automate those processes. You still at this point don't want to focus too much on the technology. You don't want the technology to define your needs and your processes. You really want your business to do that. So a little diagram that I put together here to kind of visualize this thought is that you start with that need or that requirement, and then analyze, does the standard functionality of the CRM system address the need? If it does, that's great. That's a good place to be in. If it doesn't, certainly you don't want to just jump to, okay, let's just change our process and have it match exactly, the standard functionality of the system. But instead, you want to ask yourself, can the process be modified and still address the need that we have and still solve our problem? If it can, then certainly you would want to specify a change to your process. And if it can't, reasonably, then you would want to potentially then look at a system customization there. So not always something that's going to work exactly black and white like this, but just kind of a methodology to go about when deciding when to change processes, and when to change the system. And then really, you need to prioritize here. There's a lot of processes, and as you get into this, there's going to be more problems that you had that you didn't realize you had that you want to solve, but you still need to prioritize. And going back to Jody's slide about base hits versus home runs, prioritize those out and stick with that plan. And then in this stage two, certainly if you do want to use the mobile functionality that the various CRM systems have to offer, you do want to plan that out almost as detailed as you would, kind of the user experience, sitting at their computers at their desk. You don't want to offer mobile or roll mobile out just because it's available, but you certainly want to identify, which users really truly need this functionality and will use it, and then what do we want that mobile experience to be like? Are they just going to be accessing information? Maybe, mobile salespeople, are they going to be just documenting, meeting follow-ups and call notes? Or are they truly going to be processing orders in the system from a mobile perspective? So really spend the time to have that kind of a mini project within your project to define those mobile requirements. All right, and then the next step here is step number 6, deal with your data. So this involves data migration and data integration. We'll start by talking about data migration. So a lot of times people just assume that we're launching a new system, we got to migrate all our data from the old system. But really you want to stop and you really want to plan this out. And this can be certainly, data migration and integration can be a very time-consuming and a very costly portion of the project if not done and planned out correctly. So really ask yourself, what do we need to migrate? So what data, maybe asking users, how often do you look at information in the system or order history or something that's 3, 4, 5 years old? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But certainly you want to really sit down and know what data you need to migrate. And then on top of that, why do we need to migrate it? Is it just peace of mind to have it there? Or is it truly going to be needed and useful on a day-to-day basis going forward? And another key question that will help you determine what to migrate is, will you maintain access to your legacy system? Will you easily have access to some of that data? Because certainly if it's very infrequent that users need to access that data, it might be realistic to have a system in place or process in place to get the information out of the legacy system as opposed to migrating all of it over. And then how clean is your data? Oftentimes, implementing a new system, prompts, I don't want to even say prompts, but forces people to clean up their data. How many sources of data do you have? Are we migrating from one system, or are we migrating from 3 or 4 different systems? This is a place where you're going to involve those subject matter experts that are familiar with the other systems that the data is migrating from. They'll certainly help with the mappings and such. And then really an action item here is, if you're going to be working on a CRM implementation project coming up, you really right now can start with the cleanup of your data. A lot of times, companies are aware of, where the data needs some TLC, but certainly it's a plan that can take a lot of time. So you don't want to underestimate the time there. So you want to get started on that right away. And then the next step is that the test migration validation is crucial. So in the portion of the project where a test migration of the data is done, you certainly want to spend ample time. Do not rush this piece, and validate that the data is coming over as expected. It's going in, from the source system to the right place in the new system, and it's there and it's functioning how you want it to. You definitely want to pay close attention to this piece and not rush it, because that's an area where things can get out of scope and get very costly really fast. So that's a bit about data migration. And on the next slide, we're talking about data integration. So you really want to adequately plan and discuss your integration needs. So what are we integrating? A lot of times you say we're going to integrate with ERP. Well, what does that really mean? Does that mean kind of keeping the account profile records in sync? Does that mean processing quotes and orders in one system into the other system? So really breaking down what exactly are you integrating, what data should be mastered in which system, and what your integration triggers will be. So a lot of careful planning and discussion up front definitely helps here. And then the next piece, don't integrate just to integrate. You should have a very valid reason why you're integrating the systems, and is it worth your investment? Oftentimes, as I mentioned before, integrations are areas that can be very time consuming. So you want to make sure that it really does add business value, whether that be greater data accuracy, greater insight. So possibly, salespeople commonly don't have access to ERP data, but maybe sometimes it's good and very useful for them to have that data, but you don't want to give them licenses to your ERP system, so let's expose some of that data in the CRM system. Does it provide productivity? So really just making sure that it adds business value. And then with both of these pieces, data integration and migration, it definitely can get very confusing and very complicated. Be sure that you're involved. Be involved in this piece of it, and really don't underestimate your time or the effort that will be involved here. If you don't understand, ask questions. It's better to ask the questions up front than when the system has gone live and it's maybe not quite functioning how you expected. And then really adequately validate the test migration and the test integration to avoid costly modifications.
All right, thanks, Melissa. So step number 7 is the signals. And here what we're looking at and defining is, what is your communication plan? Just like a baseball team, the calls made during the game play an important factor in the success of the team. So how you communicate with your CRM team before, during, and after your project will play a vital role as well in user adoption of your system. So let's take a look at what is the makeup of a good communication plan for a CRM project. The first piece is making sure that you're communicating up, down, and out. So by up, what I mean is you're going to want to communicate to your project sponsors, the executives and your management level teams. To this group, you'll want to provide the high-level scope of your project, communicate project milestones, the project timeline, and where you're at in regards to the project budget. This group typically is not going to want to know the intricate details of the project, but they will want to know how it will make the company better. So one of the things that I had implemented is we had a weekly managers meeting. So that was a great place to just share this information. Again, real high level, maybe 5-minute update of where the project is at. So I'd highly encourage you to, if you have those type of meetings, to be asked to place on the agenda through the duration of the project. Next is communicating down or across. Here's where you want to hold and communicate regular project updates to the people that will use the system day in and day out. You'll want to hold process design meetings with this group. Involve them early and identify what their pain points are. Knowing that the system will help them in their day-to-day will help them with user adoption in the long run. So I highly encourage you to do that. The next is communicating out. So this is where you're going to want to have that regular communication with your implementation partner. During the project that I worked on, I would speak with my consultants several times per week, if not daily. Here I would really like to emphasize that it's important not to assume that the consultant knows every intricate detail of your business. So here you want to, it's better to over-communicate than under-communicate to that partner. Remember, they're an expert in the CRM system, but they're not an expert in your business. By fleshing out those details with them, they're going to help you better leverage the system if you communicate that to them. So what are some types of communication? You know, we talked about project kickoff meetings. Those are important to adding visibility to your project. The manager meetings that I mentioned, keeping those executive level teams involved and having visibility to the project. One of the types of communications that I used in our project that was pretty successful was we did a project newsletter. So every other week I would put a newsletter together that talked about the project. And of course, yeah, we covered the project timeline and the budget and kind of the milestones. But really here was an opportunity to communicate what processes were going to be changed within the system, what areas of the business were going to be impacted, and kind of softened that by explaining it up front to people before the system was actually launched. Another piece we did too is we did a lot of case studies. So we highlighted companies within that newsletter that have been successful using CRM to show that its effectiveness to a business. Another thing you can do is a launch party. So when you're getting ready to go live with the system, go ahead and hold some kind of celebration within your organization. Make this a fun project. So as you can see here, there's different ways that you can communicate, but it's important that you just maintain that communication prior to the project, during the project, and post-project as well. Don't let it, after it the project goes live, to forget about it. Continue to maintain that communication with your group. Okay, step 8 is the playbook. And this gets into the documentation of your processes. So with any CRM system, you're going to most likely define new ways of doing processes or activities within your organization. So these new processes should be documented as it keeps your team on the same page. So for example, on the project I worked on, we redefined the logging of a sales call process. The types of calls that were to be logged were supposed to be logged to like current accounts or distributor prospects. However, after the system was launched for some time, members started using these sales call reports to write up notes about maybe potential leads or trade shows. Really, the scope and the purpose of that sales call report was being deviated from. So the leads, leads are supposed to be logged in the leads entity and trade shows in different areas. So as you can see, if I had a documented process sheet that clearly defined how sales call reports were supposed to be used, that would have been helpful in keeping the system clean. So ideally what you want to do is create standard operating procedures to help combat this. Now these can take some time to develop, but really they will help you in the long run. These SOPs should be the who, what, when, and why of your processes. They will help you if you have these documented to ease with new members onboarding to your CRM system by assisting you with training. And they will also help you ensure the consistency in the data entry, like the sales call report I mentioned. So have a conversation with your partner about what will and will not be documented by them during the project and fill in any gaps. And another point I would bring up here is don't wait to the end of the project to create this documentation. Try to create it during the project in smaller batches so it's not so overwhelming. And then finally, have a plan for distribution and updating of this over time with your system.
All right, step number 9, post-game. So this step involves really just keep the momentum going. So certainly you don't want to view your project that, okay, once we've trained the users and we're live, it's done. You certainly don't want to do that. You want to keep things moving. You want to always be evolving. So back in the previous steps, off the top of my head, I forget which numbers they were now, but you defined your requirements and you've prioritized those. And in conjunction with that, when you kind of set your vision, hopefully the vision was more of a long-term vision. So certainly keep building upon what you set up in phase 1, and go ahead and start the planning and start the rollout for phase 2, and keep that moving. Oftentimes, at the very, very beginning of implementations, customers will be very excited and get things going, and they have a long-term plan. but decide to take a little bit of a break after the first phase is launched. Certainly that's okay, but you don't want that break to turn into 2 months, 3 months, 1 year. You want to just always keep evolving, keep the momentum going. And then the third point here is keep up with upgrades. So as whichever system that you choose to implement, keep on top of those upgrades and be aware of the new functionality that gets added with each upgrade, because certainly there's going to be things that you can take advantage of to help your productivity and help automating your processes. And then always have ongoing user engagement taking place, whether that's periodic online refresher training. Right after go live, this commonly happens, but certainly it's something that can be continued. And this will come directly from users' input and feedback as to maybe what they would like to be retrained on, or what things are still a little bit confusing. Host lunch and learns. Have some lunch catered in and review certain common questions that have been asked by the users, or review certain areas of the system that aren't maybe being the most adopted at this point. Make sure that users feel comfortable speaking up and offering ideas for enhancements to the system. So ideas that they would have to make the system better, you make them feel comfortable doing that, and work those into your plan if logical. And then get involved in the various CRM user groups and all the other conferences that are put on by the software vendors, by consulting partners. Keep learning. And then also definitely take advantage of the plethora of online resources, communities and blogs and things like that are available.
Okay, we're on to step number 10, which is our final step. And this is about building your fan base. In other words, user adoption. So during this presentation, we mentioned or alluded to the need for user adoption at many stages of your project. So we're going to end the presentation today by listing this as number 10, but it could have easily took the number 1 spot. We can't underestimate how vital user adoption will be to your project. In fact, it's so important that you can do steps 1 through 9, fantastic, but if people aren't using your system, your project will not be successful. So how do you maintain and build user adoption? The first step is to communicate the big picture and business value. Here you really want to let your team know what's in it for them. How will it make their job easier? Clearly define why we are doing this and how will this implementation be good for the company. It's very important to define this and communicate this at every stage of your project. The next step is to involve your team in the planning and process design. The reality is change is hard for many, but involving people in the project as much as you can before go live will help them to be more comfortable with the change. Do this by involving them in the process of design planning and communicating with them regularly. The next step is to show how it will help the team succeed. Be their cheerleader here. Depending on the size of your project, it will sometimes be hard to maintain this momentum, but it will be important to keep your team engaged and excited throughout. Your project champions can also be a good resource to help you in this area. Next is to train and retrain your team. When it comes to this part of the project that you're ready to train your teams, ideally your training will be a hands-on event. Picture a room with all their users on their own machine. Create real-world scenarios for them in the system. Kind of replicate their everyday of how they're going to use it so they can conceptualize the use of this new system. And then remember, once training has been concluded, it's easy to assume that everyone is comfortable with the system, especially you as a project manager, because you've been in there several times and doing a lot of testing. You may give this team maybe an hour session. So remember that oftentimes people need to hear things more than once before they grasp that end goal. So continue nurturing the users after training and go live. Check with them regularly and welcome their feedback and suggestions. Also, if you are doing new system upgrades, remember that training may be involved in that as well. And finally, make the system easy. Again, building on this baseball theme, there's the saying, build it and they will come. But rather for your CRM implementations, you want to change that to say, build it so it's easy to use and beneficial, and then they will come.
All right, so that concludes the 10 steps to a successful CRM implementation. Just some questions on the left-hand side. Do you have a better understanding of the 10 steps? What can you act on now? We won't go through examples because this isn't interactive. And then really on the right-hand side, we've listed out steps 1 through 10, all in an order. So define your vision, select your partner, develop your team, establish your plan, specify your requirements, deal with your data, construct your communication plan, maintain your documentation, keep the momentum, and user adoption. Thank you.